wonderful to be here with you today, Bill, and an honor and a privilege. You are one of the world's leading leadership gurus, somebody who's practiced and now teaches and speaks about the topic. You are an executive fellow at the Harvard Business School, the former successful, very successful CEO of Medtronic, and the best-selling author of many books, I believe 9, and including your latest one, True North, the Emerging Leader Edition, which I've absolutely loved. It is absolutely clear, full of incisive questions, lots of practical advice, and the stories and the case studies are wonderful and rich. Some leaders will be familiar, but many of them will be new, particularly the emerging leaders. So congratulations and welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be with you.
Fantastic, fantastic. We've got a lot to talk about, but I'm going to be sensitive to your very busy schedule. Before we dive into topics around authentic leadership and aspects of obviously finding and practicing your true north, let's talk about context, shall we? We hear a lot about the uncertain, complex, dynamic, fragile, context-facing leaders at the moment, whether that's down to systemic issues like climate change, wars, economic difficulties. You've been practicing and researching for a few years. How much more difficult is it now, or are some of those claims overblown?
They're not overblown. I think this is the most difficult time to be a leader of an organization that I've ever seen. We're in a period of multiple intersecting crises, which is making it much more difficult. We're in the midst of a major generational change from the baby boomers who've been in charge for 30 years to Gen Xers, millennials, and eventually Gen Z. And that's causing, CEOs are being asked to weigh in on very many social issues, which in the past they never had to weigh in on. And they're saying, gee, do I really want to do this? I don't want to get involved in politics. But they're being drawn in ways that they're expected by their employees. So employees, they have agency.
Absolutely. I mean, that shift that you just referred to, I mean, in a nutshell, before we dive perhaps a little bit deeper, what are the biggest shifts in the practice of leadership from some of the more established leaders in the older generations to the more emerging leaders? What would you call out specifically?
Well, I would call out the fact that we've been in the era of command and control. Jack Welch set the standards in the 80s and particularly the 90s, and that style won't work today. Leaders today are looking to work for an authentic person. They want people who are real, tell the truth, are transparent, and they can build up trust with. So short of that, it's not just that figurehead at the top of the organization. They want people that are engaged with them personally. That's a huge change for leaders. We did a study at Harvard, my colleagues, Michael Porter and Nori of CEOs. You'll be surprised by this. They spend 72% of their time in meetings with direct reports and in their conference rooms looking at PowerPoint. Only 5% with their employees. And even worse, 3% with their customers. So how do you know what's going on?
That's awful. Even though they probably then get on a stage and say they're very customer centric and employee focused. Absolutely. Gosh. Authenticity and authentic leadership is obviously a concept and a practice you pioneered. Can you be too authentic?
Well, I don't think you just put out your whole life story in front of everyone. I think you can be real, and I think you need to have confidants and people with whom you can share your whole story and be open. And I think you need to admit your mistakes. I think it's impossible for people who work for you. If you can't admit mistakes, people can't admit theirs. And that was the old way of doing things. So I think today you have to admit mistakes, and I think you can be vulnerable. Now, how vulnerable do you want to be? You still have to give people confidence you can lead the organization. So I would say you can be too openly authentic, but I think you can't be more than too real.
These emerging leaders that are progressing through the ranks, taking on bigger roles and tackling both the systemic challenges and also delivering performance for the shareholders, how do they overcome the inertia in the system? It could be the boss who's in that command and control style that you described, or just heavy organizational inertia. How do they break through?
This is a huge problem for big corporations. if you look at the problems that Boeing had with the crash of the 737 MAX, but you look beneath that, that's exactly what they faced. The engineers knew what was wrong with those airplanes. No one ever asked them. They were having meetings up top and putting out statements that simply weren't true about how safe the aircraft was. So I think there's a huge disconnect. And so today we need to flip the organization upside down and put our frontline people on top. They're the ones serving customers. And we, as executives, C-suite people, and all the other corporate staffs, need to be supporting the people doing the work. And I think there's not enough of that. So yeah, it's very hard to break through if the boss or the whoever's on top doesn't want to break through. And I would say, people within your unit, try to create a very empowered organization, and hopefully people will see what great results you're getting and they'll take notice. But there are times when you say, I'm just up against the rules and regulations, I can't get anything done here, and it's very frustrating.
Hmm. You studied with your co-author. You studied a whole raft of different, whatever we want to call them, emerging leaders, inspirational leaders, and wonderful examples. Apart from one that you called out as somebody practicing without true north. What surprised you the most, having studied it? I mean, you've been teaching in the classroom. You've been having a fantastic network yourself. But when you dig deeper, what were the mindsets, the practices that you found in these people? You thought, wow, I didn't expect that.
What pleased me was that everyone wants to be authentic today. And what surprised me a little bit is just how many great diverse leaders there are, how many women, how many BIPOC people from immigrants in particular, doing a fantastic job of leading. And
Mm.
that's why I'm at the conclusion, after going through all these interviews, think, let's just open the door and let people walk through. They're ready, and give
Mm.
them the opportunity. And if you stagnate the system with everyone in their late 50s, early 60s, these people will leave because they're too talented to stay. So you really need to open it up to bring a lot of younger leaders into position of real line authority. I don't mean just staff roles, but real line authority.
I mean, what you're recommending is quite a radical shift for some of the big corporates. This is not, when I read it, this is not, oh, just incremental change. This is fairly, well, not fairly, this is radical change. If you're a chair or CEO looking at succession planning, this opening up is necessary and urgent, but is quite a change for many. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I tell leaders, you need to have more people in their 40s, even 30s on your executive committee, not just nice people coming up, but no, I think give them the opportunity, open the door, because they'll influence everyone else on your top team in how they're thinking about leadership within their organizations. And if you
Mm.
look at some of the failed organizations, they didn't do that. GE used to be a young person's organization. Then they went up to everyone got old, and they got in deep trouble. Wells Fargo, no one was in touch with anyone. They created a huge bureaucracy, and
Mm.
unless it goes from the top, they didn't realize what kind of culture they're creating. So leaders need to be very sensitized to really opening things up and bringing that greater, if you will, diversity and engagement into their senior ranks.
Mm. I agree. Throughout the book, you emphasize the power and the necessity of moral leadership. And I'm curious because in some organizations that are perhaps more mercenary, more short termist, um, there's often the absence of morals. People, I don't know what they do with them. Perhaps they leave them at home or they don't practice them. In these organizations, these mercenary organizations that on paper still may be very successful in a very narrow sense of success, how do you develop that deeper sense of moral leadership with the true north that you emphasize? Because again, that's a pretty radical shift. A lot of these people who have been sleepwalking and on an automated way of leading for many years, and you're effectively rewriting the rule book or
Ah,
encouraging them to rewrite the rule book or
yes.
throw it out, perhaps.
Well, we need moral leaders, I can tell you. And if you're looking at short-term quarterly earnings for a year or two, you can probably get it by stretching the rules. But the companies who didn't do that, they can't sustain results for a long time. I mentioned Wells Fargo. They had 3.3 million fictitious accounts their people created. Now, come on. Where are the auditors? Where is the top management knowing this is going on? Siemens had $18 billion in the past of audited bribes. These are real disasters. Why did all the banks collapse in 2008? Because no one was looking at their practices and what they're doing with their cash flow. And so I think an organization's got in real trouble with not looking at this and not having moral leadership from the top. In today's world, you need to have that. And the big change, David, is the employees today have agency and they're going to hold you accountable. So I'm going to give you a very specific example. Some people took the wrong lesson. Bob Chapek at Disney succeeded Bob Iger. Bob Iger was very clear on all these issues. He was out there all the time. Chapek comes in, 60 years old, 62, and he says, I'm not going to comment on any of these issues.
Yes.
And he made some decisions that his LGBTQ employees felt were adverse to them. And they told him about it. And then he changed position in midstream, and he got himself in trouble with the politics of the governor of Florida. And he got whipsawed. See, if you're not clear about your mission, you cannot speak out on everything. But you need to have a clear position on issues, particularly those that are vital to your employees.
I completely agree with that. How do you, if you are facing that context and the importance of these topics that people care about and are important for society, let alone business, but you're also having to grapple with some tricky operational challenges or difficult market conditions, and you're having to flip between the two constantly. How, as a leader, how do you do both? How can you be systemic and operational at the same time?
You have to do both. You have to have that long-term view of what's going to make our organization successful. I remember when Ken Frazier told Merck upside down by removing all his guidance because he would have had to cut research. He put the emphasis on research. Next thing you know, they came up with a drug called Keytruda, and it's the largest selling drug of all time that have been buried in the labs without the research funds to support it. That's what leaders need to do. They need to have the courage to do that. But at the same time, you got to make the numbers. And so I say, my philosophy always was under promise and over deliver. And people will be very happy. And so you keep a little bit back. You don't just put it out there as everything's going to be perfect, because everything's not going to be perfect. And then you adapt quickly to changing conditions. The leaders who did well during COVID were very rapid adapters. The three I would cite are three major retailers. Doug McMillan at Walmart, Brian Cornell at Target, Corey Berry at Best Buy. Adapted very rapidly. They recognized that their frontline workers were putting their lives on the line, and they immediately fed a lot of compensation to them. They made radical changes in their business model, and they had paid off for the three of them.
Absolutely right. So let's go back to the concept and practice of finding your true north, which is integral to everything you've been talking about. And you are a leader, or you think you're a leader, that is being successful on certain measures, but if you ask them what is your true north, they would either struggle to articulate it or perhaps wouldn't even know it. How do they develop it? And they may be somebody in their 40s or 50s. Does it matter? Does it matter that they haven't found it? Does it emerge, or should they stop, look deeper inside themselves?
The latter. I think you should be discovering your true north very early in your career. Now let's define what true north is. True north is who you are at your deepest level. It's basically the beliefs that you grew up with. It's the values that you hold dear, and it's the principles you lead by. And also, it's where do you find great joy and satisfaction in your work and fulfillment, and what motivates you. If you don't understand those things about yourself, you may be motivated by money, fame, and power, and then you get caught up with metrics. They're the wrong metrics. I always say, if you measure your self-worth based on your net worth, you're in trouble. But if you're always looking for that next title, you're looking for more power, for a bigger organization, you're going to be in trouble too. So I think you need to sit down and do that. And part of that is processing your life story, reframing it, understanding what are the good things about it? What did I learn? What wasn't so good? And then going into your most difficult time of your life, which we call crucibles. What was that time when everything was stripped away? There was no pretense. You couldn't say, I am my title, or, I'm worth so much money. No, everything's been stripped away. Everything that's important to you is stripped away. And now you're staying there and you have to say, what is important? What do I really hold dear? Now, sometimes people in their 40s and 50s, 50s a little late, haven't found what we call their North Star, the purpose of their leadership. because that may take different organizational experience. Hey, I didn't find it until I got to Medtronic in my mid 40s.
Yes.
And so your North Star, your purpose may take longer to find because you have to rub up against the world. And so it's okay to have to work for 3 or 4 organizations. Say, I can work for this one, I can't work for that one. This one doesn't have integrity, this one does. And I think you learn from those experiences that get you to the right place where you have an alignment between your personal purpose and your company's purpose, between the company values and your own values. If you're out of alignment, as I was at both Litton Industries and Honeywell, I finally got to Medtronic where it was complete alignment around Medtronic's mission and its values.
Let's dig into the crucibles, because you refer to the hardships and the moments of difficulty in life, and some wonderful and very moving stories you've included in the book. You obviously emphasize their importance as part of the formative journeys of people in creating their own form of authentic leadership. But what if you're an individual that, whether you feel fortunate or not, you've swum through life, everything's been relatively smooth? And I know a number of CEOs who've, at least at face value, would say that when you dig a bit deeper, it's not often as rosy as you might think. But how critical are those crucibles to developing authentic leadership? And can you be that type of leader without true difficulty in your life?
I think we've all had difficulty in our life. An example, one of the saddest examples I've encountered in my career is I served on 3 boards with a man named Rajat Gupta. Rajat was orphaned at age 18. His father died. He was admired his father. His mother died. He had to take care of his sister. He was fortunate to get into the Indian Institute of Technology. It was because he was such a brilliant person. He did an amazing job. He was at McKinsey for 9 years, but then he lost his way because he had never figured out that he was driven by financial
Yes,
wealth,
yes.
not just security. He was worth $120 million. That's enough for security. But no, he got caught up in that game, if you will, of how do I become a billionaire? And that led to his insider trading. But I think the important thing there is he had a crucible. He didn't process these. I'm not going to talk about that. And a lot of leaders do that. They don't want to talk about maybe that health problem they had, maybe losing a sibling. What was the importance of that? My parents' divorce, my own divorce, maybe getting fired from my job at 24. If I don't own that and acknowledge it, I could be in trouble. Remember Jamie Dimon, we asked him what was his greatest crucible, and Jamie said, I got fired by my mentor at 22 years at Citigroup, Sandy Weil, and I had to go out in the hinterlands to Chicago, not exactly the hinterlands, and the only people who were there for me, my high school and college buddies. Everyone else disappeared. Well, he came back to have an extraordinarily successful run, still going on at J.P. Morgan, most successful leader on Wall Street. But he was grounded because he knew what it was like. And so that was right, because he went back and he really was forced to process it. Probably a little too cocky before, but then he got grounded.
So that processing is absolutely critical, actually going back over your life and really learning, digging deep into it rather than skating over it or ignoring it and skipping over it. And that theme is present throughout your works, Bill, around depth, reflection, depth of leadership, and that trying to find the intrinsic motivators rather than emphasizing the extrinsic ones. You referred to boards that just then. You've sat on a number of boards of very successful companies. What are they missing right now? If you looked across the landscape of boards and you interact with board members, what are the skills or mindsets do you think are particularly missing or they need to develop? Let's put it that more positively.
For the last 10 years, boards have been focused on diversity. They have diversity today, but they don't have age diversity. So they have old people, 60s, early 70s, and there's a great tendency to think alike and not really think like your company, the organization's employees. And how are those employees thinking today? And I think that's really essential that boards get some age diversity and really get inputs from people. Because I think a lot of boards are focusing on the wrong thing, David, if I may say. They're focusing on quarterly earnings. Look, as a board member of very large companies, of ExxonMobil, Novartis,
Yes.
Goldman Sachs, Target, you can't influence quarterly earnings. Trust me. You can have an influence on strategy, You can focus on, are we gaining market share? And most important today, what kind of culture are we creating here? Because if you have a corrupt culture like Wells Fargo had, it's not going to end well. And or a short-term culture like GE had. So the board members need to be asking tough questions about how are we building this? What's our employee engagement? How aligned are they with our mission and purpose? And at GE, the mission was making money, and no one was aligned with that at all. And so eventually they collapsed.
In these leadership roles, whether as executive leaders or even the non-execs with their portfolios, they lead demanding lives, demanding of time, energy, attention, and it can often become all too consuming. That leaves a lot of collateral damage. However, you emphasize leading an integrated life. Just paint the picture of how people can do that while still performing at the highest level in business.
For the last 20 years, I've been involved in the new CEO programs at Harvard and led them the last couple of years. And we have an evening dinner where we just talk about how fully integrated. This is a very stressful job. How do you sustain your leadership over a decade? How do you gain legitimacy with all your stakeholders, starting with your employees? And it's not easy today. So we talk about, what are you doing to sustain yourself? And I think you need practices. One, I think everyone needs, starting with the CEO to the first level employee, have at least 20 minutes a day of introspection or reflection. Took up meditation 45 years ago, and it's been the most wonderful thing I've done. Maybe for you, it's going for a jog or a long walk or a form of mindfulness, or just having a discussion with your spouse. But it's all of those things that I think allow you to say, how did I show up today? Was I a good leader? Was I true to my values? Did I have a positive impact on the people I interacted with? That's not every day's like that. And did I find fulfillment? Did I enjoy today? Because if the answer to that is no, then you'll have some days like that, but too many days in a row, you're on the wrong track. Like, I'm really enjoying this interview with you. If I'm not enjoying it, this is drudgery, man. I'm coming in. He's not going to lay a glove on me. It's not going to work well. So I think everyone needs to. The second thing they need, and this is particularly true for leaders of large organizations, you need to get 360 feedback from your subordinates and your peers. And if you don't get that, you're not going to know what's going on. And some leaders I see surround themselves with sycophants that tell them how great they are. Mark Zuckerberg has done that at Facebook, or Meta now it's called. Very dangerous. I think you need to have people around you, the truth tellers, and will come into your office and say, David, you're going the wrong way here. Or you think, Bill, you think that meeting went well today? It didn't go well at all. People are very unhappy with you. So giving you honest feedback, whether it's in writing or orally. If you don't have people like that around you, it's going to be trouble. So have truth tellers and get 360 feedback.
I agree with that. And I think in the moment feedback, after an important meeting, a discussion, how did we do? How did I do? And actually listen to the answer as opposed to just doing it for the sake of it. The other thing, Bill, I just refer to, I've been surprised in my own practice how much this aspect of integrated life has come up, either in the work. And I'm not a life coach. I'm a business coach and an advisor. But the importance of conversations and contracts between husband and wife, partners, individuals, and the quality of conversation, because you can't have it all. There are real trade-offs in life, but you can talk about it openly and candidly, as opposed to either professing that you can do everything or trying to run really, really hard and then find that you run off a cliff at some point.
I think that's beautifully said. I would argue that someone who has an integrated life and can find joy in their families and their personal lives and their communities as well as their work, is going to be a far better leader than somebody who works 70, 80 hours a week and neglects those areas. And second, do you have the integrity to be that same person at work, at home, in your community, in your personal life? And I think that's critical. So I think today, younger people really want that integrated life. And a lot of senior leaders, older leaders don't understand why they want it. I can tell you they're demanding it today, but they can still do great work. It's not that they won't do great work, but they also want to have a life because they maybe saw their parents didn't have that kind of life, or they never got to know their fathers because they were working so hard. and that was a real drawback, and they don't want that. So that's another big generational change that is taking place.
Yes. You've referred, Bill, to a number of successful teams, and you referred to leaders obviously aligning the team around a powerful common vision. That's easy to say, but often hard to do and practice in reality. What have you seen that's particularly worked in actually doing that, creating that alignment?
David, you said you're a business coach. I think leaders need to think of themselves as coaches, not directors, not do this, do that. Here are the rules from on high. And so we created this acronym. The first C is care, because people are not going to follow you unless they know you care about them. And people don't leave companies today, they leave bad managers. The second thing, you have to figure out, where is everyone's sweet spot? What are they really good at and what motivates them? Say they love to go out and sell customers. Well, don't throw them into finance, and don't take the pure IT person and throw them in front of customers. They'll be very uncomfortable. So that's the second thing, is get them organized in their sweet spot. And third, as you mentioned, get them aligned around common mission and values, and have them come. I've done a number of seminars like this, did one last week for a major company, where people come in and talk about their values and their purpose, and the extent to which they feel aligned with the company's values and its purpose. And then the second C is challenge. A good coach is challenging people all the time. Think of a sports coach. There's no good football or soccer or basketball coach that isn't challenging his or her players to perform at a higher level. But then they get in, they help you. Let me show you how to do it. Here's a way you could improve your game. Here's a way you could be better. Here's a way, let's bring people together. And we got to solve this very tough technical problem we have at Medtronic. Let's get the best experts. And maybe I'm not that expert, but can help you get the people who are. And I think that makes a huge difference. So the idea that you have care, organization, organize people, align, get people, challenge them, and help them, to me, is the new model of leadership. It's not the director model.
That's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But as we draw to a close, I always ask guests in Lanceville on the line a couple of questions about themselves. Don't worry, not too personal. You referred to the power of meditation and doing that for the last 45 years. What other practices do you have that help you fuel your absolute best work? You know, when you're having an amazing day and you think, I'm really on my A game, what have you done either that day or before to help you do that?
Well, executives from CEOs on down have to be like Olympic athletes, and I think you've got to be healthy in mind, body, and spirit. So I am constantly out trying to expand my mind. I just got back from India, where we were meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is a whole new, just understanding his views of the world, which are quite different than what
Wow.
I grew up with, and
Wow.
that's amazing, fantastic. I think you have to get physical exercise every day. That kind of clears the head. I like to, I used to jog a lot, then I had a little problem by back. So I'm mostly taking long walks, climbing mountains, biking,
Fantastic.
skiing. Those things all help me clear my mind so I can think clearly and focus on what's important, as does meditation. And then finally, the spirit, I think it has to do with not religion, but so much as having a purpose for your life and having people in your life that care about you, and you care about them. It's long-term trusting relationships, and you need to nurture every one of those things. Meanwhile, you eat healthy, drink healthy, and get sleep. If you don't do those things, you can't sustain your leadership for several decades. You'll eventually derail. And so I think that is essential.
Absolutely. And your own impact. What impact do you want to have on the world around you?
Well, I decided, David, I've actually had the same goal. I didn't realize it for a long time. My purpose is helping people reach their full potential. I started this way back in
Mm.
college,
Mm.
working with younger people. They're maybe only a year or two younger than I am. And I've carried it out trying to build organizations. That's what I did at Medtronic. I was not an expert in medical technology. I helped build a successful organization there that helped contribute to its success, along with the people we had inside.
Mm.
And I think that's what I've been doing in my teaching. If I can, and that's why I write, is if we can help everyone reach their full potential, we will have a better world. But then they have to think about, how am I going to use my potential? It's to make a better place for everyone. because we need people, leaders out there doing it that are really concerned about enabling everyone to have a good life and have a better life than they otherwise would have. So that's been my goal.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bill, you're an inspirational person. I've loved this conversation. Very stimulating, enriching, really practical as well. All those combinations. Thank you. Where do people find out more about you, your work, so they can learn even more about leadership?
Well, they can come to my website, billgeorge.org. You can go. The book, I think, is a really good place to go. And there's got actually a companion field book that goes with it. You can do your own introspective work
Wonderful.
with the field book. But the idea is you've got to do your own inner work and then go out and build a team, a support team around you. I have a men's group, a couples group that meets on a regular basis to talk about these exact issues you've been raising. And so I think that's really important in life because it changes over the years, and that you have people close to you that really care about you. So I think having that support team is critical to sustaining your leadership.
Absolutely right. Bill, thank you. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do sign up to the YouTube channel and to the podcast. Give us a nice rating along the way. And Bill, thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, David.